Here we go. Without a shadow of a doubt, it's the hottest show in social media history. I want to welcome you to the War Zone. I got my beautiful co-host, Ms. Demetra K. And I am the 5-star general. And I got two phenomenal guests today. Representing Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Steve Davis, and my good friend, Dr. Ken Davis, from the Houston Independent School District. And tonight we're going to talk about saving our black young men. I just stopped the music. I'm so excited, man. It's unreal. I got two phenomenal guys sitting in here tonight that have a lot in common. I have Steve Davis out of Oklahoma City, and I have Dr. Ken Davis, who's over at the Houston Independent School District. And they have programs that are similar, that are designed to save our black young men. Now, anytime you have that going on, it's time to have a real conversation. I'm gonna let you guys introduce yourself, and I'll start with Steve first.
Well, first of all, brother, let me say thank you so much for the opportunity. My good friend, Derek Booker, better known around here as Nitro, he and I have been friends for well over 30 years, since we were juniors in high school. He mentioned you to me and the work that you were doing in Houston. And man, he told me, man, you were rattling, you rocked the boat in those neck of the woods. And one thing that I know is that we need those people in our community that are willing to, number one, speak truth to power in love, but give the people real information that can transform lives. Because I believe, I hear people always saying that knowledge is power, but I tell people all the time, knowledge is only power when it's utilized. And so you need people like you and your co-host that are willing to share knowledge, and not just share it, but to inspire other people to utilize that knowledge to transform lives. So thank you guys for the opportunity that you're giving me to come on here and be a part of a platform that is truly rebuilding communities.
Now, my other man, Dr. Ken Davis, y'all don't know him, but I know him very, very well. Showed up at Jackie A. Senior High School one year. Real quick story. I didn't want to meet him when he first came because we had been through so many principals, and I had heard the principal stories so many times that finally when I met him and he said, I know you got a lot of questions for me, you know, shoot. And I only really asked him one. I say, are you prepared to lose your job to help these kids? And he said, yeah. And ever since then, when I say he's earned my respect from being not just a principal, but being a mentor, being a father, being the head person in charge, and everybody wanting to work for him. I've introduced him, but Doctor, you introduce yourself to these good people.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Monroe, and I appreciate the accolades. And I'll share this, as I told the superintendent, share with her the other day. Everything that I've done with a group of people who believed in the work, and they just gave me the opportunity to be the leader. So I thank you for that. Ms. Demetra K, thank you. Thank you for being the co-host and inviting me on the show with Mr. Monroe this evening. I'm just looking forward to have the conversation as to how we do this work, because this is truly a God-given work that I think that, you know, it's God's work, to put it simple. And I just enjoy doing it, and it gets me out of bed every morning trying to figure out a way to make it better for kids who look like us.
Well, I'm gonna shoot the first question at you guys, and we'll kind of alternate between me and Demetra K. The school to prison pipeline is real. It's very, very real. So each one of you has a different, you have a program that's similar. Tell us how your program can either slow down that school to prison pipeline or either get rid of the school to prison pipeline. Steve, you can go first.
Well, and it's interesting that you start there, because that was one of the reasons why I started the program, was to interrupt the mass incarceration machine. What I understood was that just regular mentoring programs do not work. When you're just working with kids once or twice a week, seeing them on the weekends, that is not enough to transform lives of young people who may be living in traumatic situations, who may not have a mother or a father that is in their life in such a way that it helps them to develop the necessary resiliency tools to navigate society. So when I looked at just from a how do we eat the elephant approach, and you eat it one small piece at a time, I looked at the data, and the data showed us that public education had absolutely neglected our Black boys, and it almost looks intentional. And so I try not to become this great conspiracy theorist, but it almost looked intentional because the data is so in our face. There's nothing you can argue with when you see the data. And you look at the amount of Black men in prison, it just looks strange to me. And so I said to myself, the only way that we're truly going to rebuild communities, the only way we're really going to restore families is if I am intentional in having the conversation with those in public education and across our state on how do we intentionally go in and give Black boys what they need so that we do not send them from high school to prison.
Dr. Davis?
So I agree with Mr. Davis and that focus, because that is the work of a lot of my background, being responsible in a lot of ways for what I felt our educational system has not done in order to support the efforts in which our young boys deserve. But let me back up a little bit. Even though that has been the work in which I feel like I've done most of my career, and this is my 29th, 30th year, I kind of forget which one that I'm in this work. But as a principal of Yates, Dr. Lathan asked me if I would be interested in creating part of her vision in terms of helping our boys of color to be able to matriculate through our public education system that need a support system behind them. So all of the work that I've done in the past up to this point kind of built the foundation as to how to project this work moving forward. And so I took a little bit of a different approach. And because, you know, when you said that, you know, how do you eat an elephant? You know, my thought automatically went one bite at a time. You take a bite and then you keep moving, right? But what I feel is that the work that we do, and sometimes being intentional, as we all know, is that you can't give it to everyone in such a big form. You can't give it to people to digest because it's too massive. They can't look at the prison system and say, I want to change that, because it's too massive. You have to start where you are. And so that is the work that we're doing with Ascending to Men and Miles Ahead Scholars. Both of these are mentoring programs specifically for boys of color. And then our intention is to provide a support system that didn't focus on academics, but dealt with who these boys were as boys and young men as they enter our system or already in our educational system, and what do they need in order to get through to the place where we call graduation, right? And so, and a lot of that, as when I got to Yates, a lot of that was I asked the boys, I asked the kids, what is it that you need is going to help you be successful? They're not dumb kids. They told me, this is what I need. I need better teachers. I need more structure. I make sure my transcripts are right. I need all of those pieces to make sure that when I come to school, I'm not wasting my time. That was number one. And so I just started to move into the system in which they wanted. It wasn't like I didn't create this. I answered their question. What is it that's going to help you be successful at school? What do you need? And that's what I gave them. And they gravitated to it. And they were like, okay, you hear me, you care about us, you love us, and you want us to do well. Now you're going to help us figure out a way to do it. And now we're okay. That's how it just started to move. And from there, it started to grow into other things. It started to grow into the sports and athletics. our kids were doing some amazing academic things, but they were already doing those things. They just weren't doing it at the level we needed them to do it. And so, yeah, that prison to pipeline question is real. And I didn't negate that in the planning of how do we get our kids to do better at school. What I did was I just built them a pathway to avoid it. And that was my path. That was the plan in which I put into place.
It's Demetra.
Hello once again. So I heard both of you gentlemen talk about a support system and the term, what do they need? So like, what are some specifics to the support system? Like, I guess maybe it's on an individual basis, but is there like a pattern or a system that you have to help all of the boys, or how does that work?
So I'll jump first if that's okay. So the system that we put into place is the mentoring program, Ascending to Men. We start with our third grade boys, and we don't focus on academics, but we support it. So we have, what does mentoring look like? We have an entire curriculum that we built out around building relationships, responsibility, and a whole lot of other categories that we talked about that we felt young men need and may be missing. Some have it, some don't. It depends on who they have in their lives in terms of a male figure, a coach, or whomever, or even their mothers that kind of fill that role as the guardian. But I always tell, I always share with our women, there's nothing wrong with being a single parent as being a woman, but there has to be a man involved in there somewhere in order to give the boys some structure around who they are and to be able to identify with where they need to go or where we want them to go. So that structure was always around building relationships with them, sharing with them their importance and their value and what they can do in their lives that give them hope. And that is basically going back to, what is it that you want to do? And a lot of boys will tell you, I'm not sure. So we gave them models. We gave them we had people come in all the time, athletes, doctors, lawyers, teachers, people in the industry, people who had graduated from high school and chose they didn't want to go to college. They wanted a career. We brought them in. Share with our boys how you did what you did and then what struggles you went through so that they can at least have an idea as to what pathways that are optional. And we even talked to them about military. Several of the military officers came in and talked to the boys about an option. So we didn't specifically say, oh, you're going to college. We had a plan as to what is it that you want, because that way we can give you a path or help you build a pathway to get to that thing. So the specifics were built around, the instruction and the format, of course, of who they were. All of the men in my program are men of color, every single one. African-American, Asian, African. Actually, I lost my Asian person last year. He went to a different department. Hispanic. But all of them, the boys can emulate and see themselves in these men who work with them. So that was key to that work. But also the structure was around, if you are going to college and you plan to go to college, because we want to give everybody that opportunity. And if you choose otherwise at the end, that's fine. But we want to make sure you have that opportunity to go. So we've structured it in terms of FAFSA, their financial aid packets, their applications for college. We track all of that data, everything on every single one of our boys. We even track.
Hold on. I think he might have froze up.
Well, let me just chime in and while we try to work through that. And
okay.
so what we do with the Making of Men program, my belief that total immersion is necessary. And so it's an actual class in the daytime. These boys come 5 days a week, second hour at one particular school, first hour at another school, fourth hour at another school, depends on how we fit it in. It is an actual class they get a grade for. And that was important for me, because what we're having to do from a Making of Men philosophy and looking at the data, and I grew up as a young man from a single mother who battled depression. Father was an alcoholic, so I did not always have around me all of the necessary people that could help me develop the tools, right? The mindset. And so one of the things that I knew as a young man growing up in poverty was that how I thought mattered. And so when we put this program together, I understood that the young men that would be a part of this program would have some of those same issues. And the way that we would deal with those issues would be through everyday rigor of curriculum, okay? Research-based curriculum. So this is not about emotions and letting our emotions drive us. I believe, as my mentor, Dr. Belinda Biscoe at the University of Oklahoma tells me, is to let the data drive us. And she developed a curriculum around social emotional development. And then I made it specific to Black boys. And so what we do is a lot of what he said, we bring in those men that look just like them, that have had some successes, and some of those men who have bumped into failures and difficulties through law and came out of it better on the other side. So we show them, so I showed them and introduced them to men that come from backgrounds like them, who have not always made the best decisions, but was able to bounce back. Because that's one of the things that we teach heavy in the making of men, is that life is not fair. Your skin color does matter, but it's not an excuse for failure. And so everything we talk about is, how do I develop a growth mindset for young people, young men who are living, some of them, in some of the most difficult situations you can imagine. And so the class every day for me was key. It was very important that we get the buy-in from administrators in that school. It's very important that those school principals be willing to do professional development around equity and diversity and inclusion, because it's the bigger picture, as we know, and how that school completely embraces Black boys and minority boys that can help the trajectory of those young men's success. And so that's kind of the way I have refused. As a matter of fact, I won't even go into a school if they will not allow us to be there every day, if they will not allow us to be a part of the curriculum. I want to work with principals, and I tell them when I go in that you have to create I want to see a plan for your campus that's directly for Black boys, right? That's how intentional that we must be in this country. That's how intentional those people that are a part of public education must be. In fact, we want to close the achievement gap.
Well, let me ask this question. It's really a two-pronged question. This is not business to you guys. This is personal, it seems to me. This is personal what you're doing. Due to the inequities in a lot of the schools that have a high population of Black boys, how are you able to navigate around the inequities in these schools? Because a lot of schools are not funded the same. You know, they don't have the same monies. It doesn't work like that, you know, in African-American schools compared to affluent schools. So is it business or personal? And how do you navigate the inequities? Dr. Davis?
I'll start with the personal first. This is personal for me in a lot of ways, because I grew up, I'm the youngest of 7 kids, the only person in my entire generation, and I'm 52 years old, that has ever gone to college, graduated. Several of us graduated from high school, but I'm the only one that's gone to college, you know, and have multiple degrees. I mean, I'm the only one. And so I tried to reach back into my own in my own family to create more of an educational culture within that. And I haven't been successful doing that. And so my pathway has been to take as many people that look like us, specifically males, and push them to be able to do more and do better. And so every opportunity that I've gotten, from the classroom to administration to central office leadership, is to make sure that we focus on helping our kids of color to be successful and to be the people that we know that they can be. And they just need some supports around how to do it and to be able to navigate the system. So that's personal to me, to be able to do that. The inequities piece, I'm very fortunate in this work because I have a superintendent, Dr. Lathan, who believes in this work and has funded it. That is critical. She's given me the money for our programs. She's given me the money for our staffing units, and she is pushing us to do more and do better with kids. And because we have her support, it's easier for us to be able to go into the schools because we're not asking them for any money. We already have our program. We already have our staffing. All we're asking them for is time. And so, and they see the work that we're doing and they understand how important it is, but they also see the benefit of how it supports academics. And that grabs them right there. Like, okay, you're going to help me with my boys and it's going to improve our academic performance. Give me whatever you need, whatever. How much time do you need? And so they're bending over backwards. We're only in, for the boys program, we're only in 65 schools, 65 of 280 schools. And every single one of them want my program in their schools because they understand how important it is for our boys, but they also understand that what the benefit is for them academically. And I'll share this and then I'll flip it to Mr. Davis. Last year, we had a program evaluation of just our boys program, just our boys. We did a full year program evaluation. Our boys as a cohort outperformed the district in almost every single tested area that we performed for the state, almost every single one. And we didn't even touch academics. All we did was support them to make sure they got to class. We supported them, their behavior. Whenever they made mistakes, we were there to support them, to help them to get back on track so that they realize you may have made a mistake, so does everybody else. This is how you recover. This is what you need to do. And so we walked them through the challenges that they had. We walked them through their food inequities, their home insecurities. We walked through some of the relationships challenges that they've had. And because they trusted us, they followed the plan. And their academics improved almost across the board in every single area, from our third graders through our seniors in high school. So that just shows you why it's personal to me, because I know that gift is there in our kids, but it's that inequity of trying to make this thing balanced for them, because they can do it, they deserve it, and we just have to build a way to make sure that they get it. And that's what our superintendent has done for us.
Steve, business, personal, how do you deal with the inequities?
It's a calling, absolutely. It is the one thing that drives me every single day, and I've had to really make sure that I focus my mind from a standpoint of adding the business piece to it, because it takes money to make this thing happen. And that's the business aspect of it, but it is definitely a calling. And I will tell you this, one of the dealing with the inequities of it, and we understand how in public education, how rampant inequities are. We understand that. And then when you narrow that down and start trying to get people moved specifically around, and you unapologetically saying that you're focusing on Black boys, it makes people nervous. When I go into the room with white administrators and I start saying Black boys, it absolutely makes people nervous. But when you start putting the data on the table, when you start showing the numbers, it's hard to argue with the numbers. And as Dr. Davis just said, when you start looking at the outcomes, it's hard to argue that if you want to improve academic outcomes, if you want to improve test scores, you do have to go to the population that may be pulling down your test scores. It just does not make sense for us to recognize that there is a population in our school system that is struggling, and then we not be intentional to get them the medicine, if you will, they need to be healthy. And that's what I see what Dr. Davis and I doing in this system, is providing some level of treatment, medication, wellness plan, if you would, that will give young men the tools, the opportunity, the design, listen, to be hopeful. Because what he just said, when he's going in those schools and those young men are seeing the consistency, they're seeing the love, they're seeing that this is just not someone coming in or a group coming in doing something for business, but because they're really invested, you begin to open up their hearts with hope. And once these young men have hope, let me tell you something, it's hard to stop them. And I have found that the issue has been, when I have went into schools and met with Black boys, is that some of them just don't have hope. And so what I make sure we do with our program is that from day one, they understand this is not just about being and how do we address the issues that are in in our community. It's about how do you thrive as a leader in America, period, and globally. This is about developing you as a leader and a man beyond race. And when we start having those conversations, to watch these young boys and the light bulb come on, it's just hard to argue at that particular point in time that it is necessary that we focus on Black boys.
Ms. Demetra?
Okay, so I'll start with Steve. I'll start with you again. So the difference that I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, between both of your programs, which they both sound awesome, by the way, is Steve, you deal specifically with Black boys. Am I right?
That is correct.
Okay, and then Dr. Ken, you deal with, I guess you say, you're saying people of color.
Boys of color.
I mean, boys of color. Okay,
yes,
so Steve, I'll ask you first. What made you cater your program specifically to Black boys? And then Dr. Ken, why did you open it up to boys of color?
And let me correct part of this. Let me correct some of this. It's partially true. So I'm absolutely unapologetically focusing on Black boys, absolutely. But it's also about all minority boys. So we don't turn away any boy from the matter of fact. We have had white boys in our program, so we don't turn it away. We don't turn away anyone from the program. So I want to make that clear. But when I go in and speak to superintendents and principals, I explain to them why I am unapologetic in my focus on just Black boys, so that we can really look at and capture the data that they need in order to feel comfortable putting me in their budget. If that makes sense, because most of them, in order to justify spending the money, they've got to see some numbers. They've got to say, okay, why is this worth it? Is this worth the investment, right? And so when I go in, I'm very clear that we want to look at, we use data to drive what we do, and the consistency of coming in every single day, that consistency for me is how we will be able to move the needle. And so, but no, we definitely, sister, we don't discriminate from the standpoint of saying, oh, because you're not a Black boy, you can't come into our program. But we also make sure it's known that we are unapologetic in our attempt to transform those numbers into outcomes for Black boys.
And from us, it's boys of color, because over 60% of our school district is Hispanic. And so we want to make sure that we are inclusive. And again, just as Mr. Davis said, we don't turn away any boy that meets the criteria for our program, but we have some criteria that we want our boys to be able to meet. And that in itself opens the door to anyone, any male, right? But again, we're focused specifically around this work for African American and Hispanic boys, and it's intentional because we know that those are the two demographic subgroups that struggle the most. And so we wanted to make sure, and I even dug a little deeper because we looked at schools and we ranked all of our schools in terms of looking at their at-risk numbers, the behavior discipline referrals, the attendance issues, the performance of the school, the performance of the students. So we looked at all of those categories to determine which of our 280 schools we need to address first. And so those are the schools that made the cut. And I ranked all of our schools from the first most needy to the 280th school that is the least needy. And so as we build our program, we're addressing each of those schools as we build, so that eventually, and our plan is to be able to get my program in all schools across the district we're in the second year, within the next 8 years. So hopefully we can make that. Corona has put a little backstop on our plan, but we still want to be able to address it because our goal is to address 100,000 males of color in our school district within 10 years. And we're going to need an awful lot of help from our mentors from around. And now that we're kind of moving into that virtual reality of mentoring and getting that support, I think it opens up the opportunity for us to have more mentors to help more kids faster than I think we could have in the past. So that's why we've kind of opened it up, because we feel and we know that in our district of 210,000 kids, half of them are male. 75% of the males are boys of color. So you're looking at 75,000 boys that need a mentor today, right? And so we're trying to make sure that we address that issue.
Well, let me ask this. I'm gonna ask a question for Brenda Limbrick, one of our viewers. She wants to know the effectiveness of in-school suspension compared to alternative school, basically compared to your program. Now, I know when you were the principal at Yates, we had countless conversations, and I would tell you we need to do away with in-school suspension. It doesn't work to just send a kid into a classroom and basically punish him in in-school jail. That was my opinion. You know, we need to do some type of mentoring while they're sitting in their classroom. So effectiveness, because some people believe in alternative schools, some people like in-school suspensions, but compared to your programs. Dr. Davis, you can go first.
Okay, I think that there are specific needs for alternative schools. There is a need for them. And my intent was not to send any child, but there were some students that deserve that earn the right to go, right?
Exactly.
And so we had to figure out a plan to do that. But even in going, we still worked on terms of what their assignments were, what their responsibilities were, even while they were there, because they were still connected to my campus. And that's the way the alternative centers work. They may go there for their disciplinary actions, but the school is still responsible for their academics and their performance and so on, et cetera, and so on. So you never lose that kid. So that's why we kind of kept that connection with the child to make sure that we were responsible for them. How is the program connected to them? I think Mr. Monroe has a very good point. How do we continue this type of mentoring and support for kids that end up in those situations? And that's one of the areas I think that we struggle in. And I'll be honest with you, because and what I've tried to do within our work is to tier the boys into 3 tiers. Our tier 1 boys, those boys have somewhat of a support system. They're academically strong, and they're able to move they're able to matriculate through the public school system without a whole lot of challenges. Tier 1 boys are pretty good. Our tier 3 boys are the boys that have often been tapped by the legal system, JJAEP, DAEP, all of those disciplinary programs because of the severity of some of their behaviors. Those boys, there are special programs that we're also working with in other forms in our district to address those boys as well. But those are not the boys that generally fall into the program in which we're working. My program generally deals with the tier 2 boys. And so when you're looking at those alternative programs, that's not something that we try to make sure we avoid any of those kind of things that our boys will have to go through, because we try to intervene if there is a serious situation that could possibly cause them to have to get to that point. And so I'll give you an example. One of the boys last year his plan was to steal a laptop from another student and take it. Now, there was a couple of things wrong with that we tried to work with this young man. He was a junior at the time. And so he didn't take this. It's like you're at a grocery store. If you don't take it out of the store, it's not stealing yet. And he had not taken it out of the building. It was in the bathroom. And so I tried to get the principal to understand that the theft had not occurred. The intent may have been there, but I need you to work with me to help work with this young man, because he's the one that's slipping away from us, and I need your support, because if he goes to this system, we are more likely going to lose him. And so that was a battle I went back and forth with the principal over a while to get this young man some behavior supports that our men in our program could provide for him. I wish I could tell you that it worked for him, but the principal and the teachers were adamant that he deserved the right to go, and that's what was going to happen. And this young man ended up going through a whole bunch of unnecessary issues because of that. Grandmother put him out. He ended up living with his friends. He was going from hotel to hotel with certain friends, house to house with certain people. So that kind of, it compounded the issue of this young man if he had just given us more time to work with him. He was already a child in trauma, but it's, and I'll say this, and forgive me, but sometimes it's us doing it to us that's causing the issue. And so when you get to those places and people don't understand the work that you're trying to do, they forget when they look in the mirror who they see. And so my effort is, when I'm looking at alternative programs, I'm saying, yeah, they're there in their value for some kids, and they need that, but for the majority of our kids, that is not the place for them, and we need some alternative plans within our current schools. And I think that we can be creative and support them instructionally and mentoring and et cetera to get most, we won't get them all, to get most of them and to keep them on track. So that's my kind of my opinion about alternative schools versus public schools and how our program can support this work of keeping our boys on track.
And I'll say this on another side. I'll say this on the other side of that. That's why one of the things that I try to do when we work with schools is to do professional development and training with administrators in those schools, with those teachers, because it's important that those teachers and administrators understand the trauma that many of our young people are already living with. That makes a difference, you hope, when those who have chosen the vocation to serve young people, you would hope that they allow that trauma to inform what they do. And when you add to that the cultural difference, it's important that they understand why we advocate what he just talked about, how that suspension can snowball into about 10 different additional things, and how that in itself becomes that pipeline to prison. So one of the things as we do this work, and I tell people as I travel this country, superintendents and anyone who will listen, is that be intentional to train your staff. Be intentional to go to professional development as leaders, to understand the cultures that you're serving. Otherwise, you will go in and be way too hard, create additional issues that could have been avoided if you took a heart approach instead of a mind approach. And so that's kind of my spin. He was absolutely correct from the, I totally agree with him on that, the in-school suspension and alternative school. The conversations that principals have to be willing to have with young people and taking into account what their life is, the trauma that they are living with right now, I think must inform how you discipline. I didn't say punish, because most administrators I have met are punitive. And that's a whole nother conversation for another day in public education, how punitive we are and how that lays bricks and a foundation for many of our African-American boys to become angry men.
Demetri?
So I have a question for both of you. Within the school systems that you work with, what do you find yourself doing more mentoring or advocacy? I know I said that wrong, but advocating for the students, rather.
That's a really good question. And one of the things that I have said to be more intentional on both ends, right? Because I did find myself having to try to go and convince, right? And I got tired of that because I was not putting the time in with some of the other things I should have been doing that could have enhanced the program. But I understood that in order for this to really become a part of public education around this country, that I really had to, and other Black men like Dr. Davis, we really have to push the conversation. So that means we have to get into those rooms and those meetings. And when you say advocate, really kind of tell the story, create the narrative in such a way that they can understand why it's important to be intentional in our approach with each group, each demographic inside our school.
And Demetri, I would say, I would add a third part. It's not necessarily, it's a lot of mentoring, it's a lot of advocating because you're advocating for kids and their families. But it's more so coaching for me. It's coaching people who are in this work to understand the reality in which we're working, the kids in which that are coming to us and the environments in which they live. But more so, it's the supports that we need to put into place that needs to be consistent to help them to be able to jump through any hoop that they encounter. So it's a lot of coaching around what is it that they need? How is it that you're going to fulfill that gap? Who do you know that's going to be supporting this work? Are there funding sources or other resources that we need in order to be able to provide them, whoever that them they may be? The reality of we need some help. We just don't know where to go and get it. So it's all the men in my department. I spent a lot of time initially coaching them on the process of building relationships, because that is key for every single piece of our work. If we have strong relationships with the kids, they trust us to be able to tell us what they need in order to be able to help them. We have strong relationships with principals, they allow us to come in and do the professional development, the training on how do we build relationships with kids of color. And what does that mean? What does it mean when a Black boy is angry versus being frustrated and asking for help? What does that look like? Because people don't identify it, because they automatically assume Black boys, or especially boys of color, are automatically angry instead of being upset or frustrated. See, they don't get the difference. Because if another child walked into their classroom and they were having a bad day, that's what they term it, a bad day. But if there's someone else walks into the room, then all of a sudden they're angry, and then they become, and I love this word, aggressive. What does that look like? I mean, if I'm upset, what does aggressive look like to you then? And how do you define that in your work as an educator, to be able to use your strategies to be able to say, you just need a minute, calm down. We can talk about it. I'll give you a few minutes to get yourself together. Let me get everybody else taken care of, and then I'll come back and handle it. We can talk about what your needs are. No, people don't do that enough, because our kids don't see that as you care about me. What they see is that you just want me out of here anyway. And so when we're looking at that, we have to coach people around what does that look like in terms of people of color. We don't respond the same way to everything, but that doesn't mean we're different. That just means that sometimes we just need to be taught the process of what the system requires us to behave like. And if our culture isn't necessarily acceptable, then how do we code switch and teach our kids how to do that so that they can perform in the environment in which they're going to be in? Because we know that they need that skill and they know how to do it. We just need to teach them the process in which is appropriate. And so I think it's more along the lines of coaching and listening.
Let me ask a question, because I know it's tough. Now, when you're building these programs and you know what you need to make it work, how hard is it to convince sometimes a diverse administration that this has to be African American? It has to be ran by African Americans. How tough is that for you guys when you initially start? Because I think me and Dr. Davis, we worked on creating the entertainment program at Yates, and I think we're doing pretty good. Am I right, Doc? That program is thriving, but
Yes,
to get it off the ground, it was like, I don't know. But so how hard is it when you got to tell them, Steve, look, I only need the Black role models for this program, or Dr. Davis, I need African Americans for this program, because you're gonna have some people watching this that's like, well, why can't we have a white guy that's helping the Black kids? I know it's a tough question, but I'm gonna shoot them at you.
Okay, I'll start, because I think this is where it gets interesting, right? I have always been a proponent of equality. Now, if we're gonna look at equality, we have to look at it from both sides. Can anybody do this work, no matter what color or ethnic group that they're from? I would say it depends on the person. It may not necessarily fall into the scope of what color you are or what race you are, but I think it really has to be people who look like the kids in terms of who's going to be laying hands on them every opportunity that they get. Let me give you an example. I've worked for superintendents that were Caucasian. They've supported the work of this type of work, whether it was schools of color, which majority, Hispanic schools, African American schools of color, and they were flooding the schools with funds and support and whatever. But it was somebody that was not, they didn't look like the kids, but they were definitely advocating for them all day long, every day, every dollar that they could possibly get. But I think that's great, and people can do that work. But if you're asking me who can put their hands on kids, and I'm not talking about the mentor that comes once in a while. I'm talking about that every opportunity, consistent touch. That really needs to be somebody who looks like the kids, because they get more ground, they'll move quicker, they'll open up a little faster to be able to help to get someone to allow them into their personal space and their personal lives. So does it have to be somebody of color? I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. It depends on the heart and their intention. But I think that whomever touches the kids, directly needs to be somebody or people that look like them.
Steve?
And that has never been an issue for me because I'm an outside organization. So when I come in with the understanding that I'm a Black man unapologetically focusing on building Black boys. And so if in fact that is a question, and I'm sure sometimes it is, they have not said so to me because I have made it clear from the very beginning that our intent is to unapologetically focus on Black boys, and I agree with him, heart absolutely matters. It doesn't matter your color in serving a population. It does matter, do you care? It does matter if they know that you love them, but it also does matter that the person looks like you, simply because it's human nature for one who looks like me to be a little more engaged, involved, and understanding, particularly when you have walked and lived in those shoes. And that's one of the things that I make clear to all principals that I talk to when we talk about the facilitators, the Making of Men facilitators that I bring in. We do a Making of Men conference every year, and I get some of the most dynamic men in the state of Oklahoma who are all African-American, and I'm unapologetic in that approach, because we're saying to them and to the larger system is that when we are intentional and when we are unapologetic in our focus on our young people, we can change outcomes.
Demetri?
So I have a question for both of you. Have you ever entertained maybe starting an all-boys school?
I'll start with that. I absolutely have. I'm one who believes that the dream should be so big that it scares you. I'm one that believes that a real dream requires the help of a whole lot of people. And I also believe that young men of any race, but particularly we're talking about Black boys, when you can put them in an environment where from Jump Street, from the time they walk on campus to the time they leave, they know that our focus is on those issues and how we educate them as male students. Let's just throw away African-American males, but male students. I believe the learning environment is different. And I think Dr. Davis would agree with me. When you go into a classroom of all boys and you go in there and you're able to teach them and they're all African-American boys, that is a robust, dynamic conversation. You see them open up and say things they would never say. When we are able to go in and set the expectation so high, whereas normally that boy would if it was a white teacher, you say that, let's say that would be hard on this kid. He could leave out and say, "Oh, he don't like me because I'm Black." Well, you can't run out of Mr. Davis's class and say that because I'm setting that expectation from the time they walk into the classroom that failure is not an option, and you can't give me an excuse. I don't care what's jumping off at the house. That's why you're in here, is I'm gonna give you tools to navigate whatever's going on at home. Whether mama's smoked out, whether daddy's locked up, we're not gonna give you any room for failure. What I am gonna do is I'm gonna give you some tools to say, you know what? This is life. It is what it is. Now, how do I adjust as a Black man? And I think that's what makes what Dr. Davis, what I do so unique, is that we can look at these boys and say, hey, look, man, I get it. It's hard. I get it. You're frustrated. You're even angry sometimes. But young bro, there's no excuse for your behavior being disrespectful and disruptive. Yeah. And when we're able to say that to them and they look us in our eyes and they see our heart, it's just hard for them to deny that.
Right. Yeah. We do in our district have boys' school. We have a boys' school and we have a girls' school. I wish we had more. And I can even think back when I started teaching, where I had an all boys class. And just as Mr. Davis said, the content in which we taught was at a very high level, and the boys did extremely well. But you could tell their behavior was different when they became co-ed. So they just kind of got off track, so to speak. But I think that there are times in young men's lives, and this is the same thing that you can say for young ladies. There are times in the lives of young men that they do need to be separated in order to get them what they need internally so that they can understand their worth and their value and their educational potential so that they can only focus and you can navigate them easier through that. It's not completely easy, but it's easier than having the distraction. Same thing worked for the girls, right? And so when we're looking at how and why that's important, if you look at the data, it tells you that it works. The problem is the system in which we work in doesn't always allow that because we're looking at what's equitable and what's, discrimination and so on and so forth. But we have a couple schools in our district that do have those environments, and they seem to be quite successful.
Here's a question. I have a philosophy when I see the kid with the pants hanging, and a lot of people don't understand these kids. They don't even know how to have a conversation with them. And I always tell people, oh, he should pull his pants up. I say, well, if you help him lift his mind up, his pants gonna follow. That's how I feel. So how do you deal with the kid and just point blank with the fly mouth to get him to transform, to get him to understand what respect is, as well as making them understand that the way you're dressing, and what I do, Dr. Davis, I don't know if you know, in the class that me and you created, entertainment, everybody likes to call the kids scholars, but I walk into the classroom and I call them young CEOs. So if you're a CEO, your pants are not going to hang. That's how I feel. You're not going to sag them because it's hard to do that in a three-piece suit. So how do you have that conversation with that kid? Dr. Davis?
So I'll start with Yates. When I was a principal at Yates, we had dress code. We expected the kids to be in dress code and so on and so forth. And we did have a lot of kids that sagged and that they thought that was the attire. And so, it never got to 100% of everybody not doing it. So I'll put that out there. We never got to 100%, but the kids were better. That wasn't my focus initially, because I wanted to build relationships with them so that they understood why it was important for them to look a certain way. So that relationship building became, why is school important? Then why do I have to act right at school? I mean, why is that important? And then it was, why do I need to dress a certain way? Why is that important? Because they didn't understand how all those things lined up to get them to the future in which they wanted. So you had to tell them along the way why certain things were important and why they needed to do a certain thing a certain way. And they looked at me and all the men on my staff, either we wore suits, shirt and ties, or if they had a collar on of some sort, if they were in athletics or whatever their program is. They never saw one of the adults on my staff sag. And then I always ask them, why do you think that's the case for these people? And so they had to kind of put it in perspective. Well, they're adults. Yeah, they're adults. What else? Well, they have jobs. Yeah, but what kind of jobs? Yeah, but they're professional jobs. They blah, blah, blah. So they started to put it together as to why that was important. And in order for them to get to that place, they understood that I've got to get there to be able to do that. I may not get there right now, which wasn't my point. My point was I need to get you there, and I need to work out a plan to get you there as quickly as possible. Now, other schools had issues with the way, we handle things at Yates because they felt like the kids had too much freedom and they weren't doing this or that or the other, or whatever. But our scores improved. The kids' attendance improved. I didn't have kids fighting as often. Now, they did fight sometimes. Didn't have them fighting as often. And they weren't leaving the campus because they were trying to go get something to eat because we were bringing everything they needed into the school. And that was the whole point. Bring everything that they need in these walls so that they can do what they need to do while we have them. Because when they leave us, I can't control any of that. So we're just trying to build that so that they understood dress code is important, but it has its place. I wanted to focus more so on the relationship to get these kids to perform. And that's what I pushed more so on.
Steve?
And let me just, let me be real honest with you. I make sure they understand that I'm the product of pimps and preachers. That I grew up next to a dope house, that I knew that I grew up knowing and still know the community drug dealer, that wherever it is that they think they can take me, I've been. I've never shied away from explaining to these young men how trifling I was. as a young man. And when I say trifling, I'm talking about my lack of respect for women from the standpoint of wanting to have as many as I could, wanting to dominate them, and how that was a mindset that I got from the streets, right? And I make sure that that's known from day one. And once these young men understood over the 20 plus years I've been doing this, when those young men have understood that Mr. Davis can be and has been as gangster as we think we are, all of that goes out the window. Because one of the things that I believe that I can do, the best thing that I can do as a leader, is be vulnerable and transparent at the same time, right? And so I share with them, hey, look here, man, I've been there and done that, so don't go there with me. And I make sure all of our facilitators, when they come into our classrooms, when they come into and facilitate at our conferences, I tell them to leave the fake persona at the door. I don't want to see it. Because what we want to show these young men is that you can be professional, you can be respectful, you can embrace your culture, you can do all those things, right? And still be a great person. With me, with that, guys, I'm just real. I'm a straight, super straight, no filters kind of guy. I'm being a little filtered here because I don't want to make my friend D look bad because he brought me on her. I'm being real filtered. But normally I am as unfiltered as they come.
Demetri?
Actually, I would just, want to make a comment that I think it is so important to share experiences, our own personal experience with people we're trying to lead or mentor, because there's nothing like somebody trying to tell you, how it is and what to do, and they've never done it. It's just hard to relate to. So I think it's awesome, especially when our kids, because, as I saw and somebody made a comment, we don't have a lot of Black male teachers or mentors in the school. And so I commend you both tremendously for doing what you're doing, because our boys really need to see someone that looks like them, that's successful, and, just really pouring into them positivity and, just pushing them. So my hat is off to you guys.
Can I share with you a little bit of what we're doing? Because we're trying to get more African-American, more men of color into education. And so we are working with the Houston Community College, University of Houston Downtown, and Clemson University on a program that's called Call Me Mr. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's the Clemson University has created a program, and they've been in existence, I think, for 20 years, where they recruit and get these young boys into college. And then they add another layer of the educational components onto their college programming. So we're doing the same thing. We're going to start this in the fall at University of Houston Downtown. And we're going to recruit some boys who want to go into education to become teachers. And we're going to provide them, there's some financial aid packets and all those things that are going to be able to support them through that. And then and then Clemson is coming in to train us, as well as the professors at University of Houston Downtown, because they have somewhat of a mentoring program at University of Houston Downtown, in which our boys kind of feed into at the college level, or can feed into. And so they're going to develop them, and then they come back into our school district to become teachers. So we're really looking forward to what could that possibly look like as a pilot, so that we have instead of a pipeline to prison, we have a pipeline to college back to our school district to be able to become teachers and young men of color for teachers. But I also want to share with you that when I was at Yates, the boys constantly asked me all the time, where'd you come from? Where were you? And how did you become who you are and all that kind of stuff? They had no idea that I came from the projects and the ghetto and grew up in the hood and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, you don't talk like, and I said, I had to learn not to, because I knew I was going somewhere different. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't speak the way I used to speak in order to be able to do the work that I'm doing now. So they had to, and so I made a video and I posted it on YouTube, and I wanted all the kids to watch it because I wanted them to understand my story. And not to the point where it was graphic or anything like that, but I wanted them to understand that I didn't just walk out of my house one day and became the man that they see in terms of the principal at the school. And I agree with Mr. Davis. and I share this with the men that I work with all the time. The boys need to hear your stories because they automatically think one thing about how you got here, but you need to tell them the reality because that struggle is real. And they need to understand how you did it to give them ideas on how they can do it. And so those are some of the things that are there. And it's still on YouTube. I left it out there for the kids to be able to see.
Yeah,
This will be my final question. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just going to say that helping young men, young Black boys particularly, understand that what the process is. That part of the process is that the confusion of figuring it out. That the process is painful. That the way that we get to purpose is jumping over the barrier of pain, and many times that's the homes that we live in. That's the families that we come from. And to share our story, as Dr. Davis said, for us to share our story is what really makes what we do work. Because when they understand, and young men tell me this all the time, when they say to me, now I understand that what I'm dealing with is not uncommon, it makes it easier for me to deal with it. I said, absolutely, young brother. You ain't dealing with nothing nobody else haven't dealt with.
Yeah. And on our research, that I shared with you, our research that we did with the boys, the program evaluation, when we surveyed the boys at the end for the evaluation, that was one of the #1 things that the boys said that they gravitated to. They remembered the stories that their leaders, their program managers had told them that gave them hope. That was one of the #1 things.
Well, this is my last question, and it can go to both of you guys. I mean, the pandemic has slowed us down on a lot of levels. Are you keeping up with your boys?
So I'll quickly answer this so he can. Absolutely. One of the things that we have Google Classroom, and so we have assignments on Google. They have a few different assignments where you have to create video talk shows on, because one of the things they have to do every day in our class when they walk in is each boy had a day that they had to go to the board and put a quote of the day up and a word of the day that went with the quote. And so what I had them do while we are in this self-quarantine, if you would, is that they have to send post videos to our Google Classroom, same way we would have done in class, but they need to be creative and do it in like a talk show form, or create it like videos or something like that. And I text them twice a week, just encouraging them, to check on them, to let them know that we are thinking about them, that I care about them. And it's been amazing to me because I'll get a return text at 1 and 2 in the morning. And I'm thinking to myself, these kids don't have no ideal of time here, but it's good to know that they were thinking and responded at that time. And they said, hey, Mr. Davis, I'm just glad to know you're thinking about us.
Yeah. For us, we are still working on, because mind you, we have 3 mentoring programs. We have the Roses, our Resilient Outstanding Sisters Exemplifying Success. That's our girls program. And we're right at about 50% of contact with the girls. And we're trying to make sure we improve that. With the boys, we have our Ascending to Men, the program that I've shared with you, the one that we're most focused on right now in terms of getting all of them. And we have 2,000 boys, right around 2,000 boys in that program. And we're right under probably about 45%. So we're struggling with that area. And the reason why we're struggling is because we're still working on getting devices into the hands of all of our kids. We are at the school district where all of our high schools, all of our kids, upon enrollment, they get a laptop. So that's how we distribute instruction and instructional supports. Our middle school and our elementary kids, we're more so focused on the hard copies and making sure the kids in our virtual lessons online and our TV channels to help support our recorded lessons and things like that. So we're reaching them and it's just moving a little slower than we anticipated. And so we're still calling and texting and we have a system that we're tracking all of that data on which kids we're able to get and which kids were being consistent, but we are in the process of capturing all of our kids. And every week we look at that number to say, okay, how many kids do we have? Are we still needing to reach? Where do we need to do? What do we need to do in order to be able to reach them? What pathways what social platforms have you reached out to the kids? And even going through the parents calling them on their cell phones saying, hey, I just need to check on Timmy today. Is Timmy available? Can I talk to him? Just for about 5 minutes. And so we do everything that we possibly can to reach our kids. And that's what we want to get to 100% before, because we're going to go all the way through the summer of mentoring our kids. We don't stop. There, just because the school year ends, we don't stop mentoring our kids. So that's what we're working on.
Ms. Demetra, your final words?
My final words is really just thank you. Thank you both for doing what you're doing, because we know the youth is the future. They are going to get us out of what we're in now. And so we need them to have everything possible to be successful. So thank you so much.
Final words, Mr. Steve?
Well, let me just say, commend my brother, Dr. Davis, and the work that he's doing there in Houston. I went to Texas Southern University. Dr. Austin Lane is a great friend of mine. We grew up together. Let me just go on record in saying that I'm disappointed in my alma mater and how they treated Dr. Lane. But I went to Texas Southern. I remember Yates High School. I was just there. My son went to Texas Southern. He's back home now because of this. So I was just there. Thank you guys for the work that you're doing. Thank you, Dr. Davis, for what you have said today. You've inspired me today, and you've given me some new thoughts and ways to approach this and to add to what we're doing, because we don't have to recreate the wheel. There are things and programs out there, and you are evident of that very thing. So thank you, sir, for what you do and allowing me to be on here with you. And thank you, Brother Gary, for the opportunity to come on and have this very needed conversation. I believe it will transform our community.
I would like to share with you,
Dr. Davis.
I do want to just share with you the other program that I didn't really emphasize is our Miles Ahead Scholars Program, and this is our elite one of our.
We just got that one.
Yeah, we just got it this year. We just started working on that, focused on it this year, and those are our freshman and sophomore boys at 3 of our most challenging high schools that have a low college entrance rate. And so we put in Miles Ahead Scholars. We've gotten some funding from the Texas Education Agency. We have some senators that are helping to support this work. Senator Boris Miles and Senator Ralph West out of Dallas. We have them, and they're supporting this work around how do we get our high-performing African-American and Hispanic boys to Tier 1 colleges and universities anywhere in this country that they want to go. So we have some funds that are we're at reprogramming, adding additional programming, mentors, getting the boys some exposures where they will be able to visit college, Tier 1 colleges and universities around the country. And so we are setting them up for this plan. And we already have this is their first year. We have freshmen and sophomores. So by the time they graduate from HISD, they'll be able to compete in terms of applying and enrolling in any Tier 1 college or university in the country. That's our goal. And so that's the other program that we're working to try to make sure we're adding those another level of support for our boys of color. So with that being said, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Monroe, for inviting me to this program tonight. I've enjoyed it. I always love talking about our kids and what we're able to do. Ms. Demetra, thank you so much. You've been an excellent co-host, so thank you, ma'am. I also want to give kudos to my superintendent, Dr. Granita Lathan, because without her vision, this work would not be possible. This is her vision and her dream as to how do we lift and support our kids of color, specifically our boys of color. And now we also have our girls of color program, the Roses, and that we're just trying to come at it from all angles to be able to help as many kids as possible. So I'm Brother Steve, I am just in awe that you're doing this work. And I want to, take my hat off to you if I was wearing one, take my hat off to you to say, this is not easy work. And I know it. And it takes someone to be brave enough and conscientious to think beyond yourself to help other kids who look like us and even those who don't, to try to figure out that they deserve a respectful place in this world, and we have the tools to help them get there. And if we don't do what we're supposed to do to help them get there, then shame on us, right? I'm trying to get to heaven, so I'm going to do everything I can to help everybody else do their thing so that we can help our kids be successful. And I am just truly honored, and thank you all for this time tonight.
Well, I want to say, and then we'll close it out, that some kind of way you two guys really need to connect. Your kids need to meet each other so that they can clearly understand. Just because you're in Oklahoma City don't mean that they got some other black boys in other cities that's not going through the same thing. They need to be able to understand they have the same issues. But at the same time, and I'll close this thing out, me being a young black boy from 3rd Ward, Texas, that only had 3 pairs of sweatpants to go to school with every school year. I look back now at 52 years old, and I've lived a fabulous life. I've been able to do everything I've ever wanted to do. I've eaten in any restaurant I wanted to eat in. I've traveled all the states. I got married on the beach in Hawaii. These kids can be whatever they want to be. They are the greatest generation that has ever been made. And the one thing that they have about them, and the good doctor Muhammad teaches us every day, he say they are fearless. If you gain their trust, they are fearless. I appreciate you guys coming on. And if y'all don't mind, behind the scenes, I'm gonna see if I can just give both of y'all each other's information. Because y'all need to work together outside of doing what you normally do, if
Absolutely.
that's cool.
Absolutely.
I'd be honored. Thank you.
Say, man, we don't just show up, we show out. Provoking conversation in the war zone. But tomorrow night, we going in, man. Wayne Delicino tomorrow night. Want to say thank you to my beautiful co-host, Demetra K, my good friend, Steve Davis, my other good friend, Dr. Kenneth Davis. We'll see y'all tomorrow, man.
All right.